I was never a superstitious person, but what I experienced in the mountains completely changed my perspective on what is real and what is just imagination. It all started as a typical mountaineering expedition with a few friends. The goal was to climb a trail known for being relatively easy, with no major challenges. On the second day of the journey, everything seemed perfect. The clear, sunny sky, the fresh mountain air, and the sound of our boots crunching the dry leaves was the only thing breaking the deep silence of the forest. But as we progressed, something strange began to take over me, a growing sense of discomfort, as if something or someone was watching us from afar, observing every step we took. It felt as if the environment was tense, but no one else seemed to notice, which made me even more anxious. During the hike, a bizarre event occurred that left me completely disturbed. João, one of our friends, started to pick up the pace, as if he were in a hurry to get somewhere, or as if he were running from something. We tried calling him, but he didn't respond. In fact, he seemed to ignore our shouts and distanced himself more and more. Initially, we thought he was just tired or trying to reach a point further ahead. However, something deep inside me told me that something was wrong. And suddenly, without any explanation, João appeared before us, as if he had materialized there, as if he had been following us the entire way without us noticing. What scared me even more was the empty look in his eyes and his absolute silence. "What happened, João?" I asked, trying to understand what was going on. He didn't respond, just stared at me with empty eyes, remaining silent. That was enough to send a chill down my spine, but we tried to move on, thinking it was just a strange moment, without paying much attention to what had happened. We continued our ascent along the trail, but the feeling of unease never left me. Every step felt heavier, as if the forest around us was closing in on us. João's presence, now distant and silent, made me uncomfortable. It was as if he was no longer the same person. Something in his behavior felt out of place, and the atmosphere around us was thick with an almost palpable tension. I tried to rationalize everything that was happening, but with every step, my mind questioned what was real and what wasn't. The trail, which once seemed familiar and safe, now felt like a strange, almost threatening place. And the feeling of being watched, this invisible presence that accompanied me, only grew stronger, making me increasingly alert and anxious to finish that climb. When we reached the top of the mountain, the weather changed abruptly and frighteningly. The wind, which had been light, suddenly intensified in an unexpected way, and the visibility, which had been clear, started to fade before our eyes. In a matter of minutes, a dense, thick fog engulfed the area, making it impossible to see more than a few meters ahead. It was at that moment that something truly disturbing happened. As I walked, I could feel footsteps behind me, as if someone were rapidly approaching. However, when I turned around, no one was there. At first, I thought it was a mistake, that my mind was creating those sounds due to fatigue or the growing fear. But when I quickly glanced out of the corner of my eye, something caught my attention. A dark shadow, moving erratically between the trees, as if it were an unknown presence hiding in the fog. The air grew dense and heavy, and a sense of dread began to spread throughout my body. I looked at the other members of the group, expecting to see that they were equally alarmed, but to my surprise, it seemed that no one else had noticed what was happening. As the day turned into night, our situation became increasingly unusual and unsettling. João, our friend, who had been calm until then, began to act extremely strange. He would suddenly stop, stare into the empty space with wide eyes, and murmur softly, almost as if talking to something invisible. "They're here," he would say repeatedly, but no one knew who he was referring to. The atmosphere was so thick with tension that it felt like the very environment was suffocating us. The weather had completely changed, and we began to realize that the situation was spiraling out of control. We decided it was time to descend the mountain and head back, But what we found as we tried to follow the path back was even more terrifying. The trail, which had seemed familiar before, now felt different, as if we were in a place we had never set foot in before. The feeling of being lost overtook all of us, and with every step we took, the discomfort increased. The sensation of being watched, observed closely, became unbearable, but no one had the courage to speak about it. The silence that surrounded us was heavy, as if an invisible presence was trying to keep us quiet, and fear prevented us from making any wrong movements. With each passing moment, the silence grew heavier, more threatening. It felt as if the very environment was against us, as if the nature around us was reacting to our presence. Fear was palpable, and no one knew what to do anymore. Our steps, which had been steady before, were now slow and hesitant. We tried to find the original trail, but everything seemed distorted, as if we were trapped in an endless nightmare. Night fell quickly, and with it came a darkness that seemed to swallow everything around us. The sound of the trees swaying in the wind mixed with Juon's low murmurs, as he seemed lost in his own thoughts, repeating incomprehensible words. The fear of being watched grew with every second, and the feeling of being surrounded by something, or someone, became increasingly intense. Anxiety took over everyone, but no one dared to break the silence, as if something invisible was keeping us prisoners amidst that terrifying fog. Fear took over all of us, spreading like a dense fog that seemed to engulf each one of us. Every step we took back felt heavier, more distressing, and at the same time, the sensation of being watched intensified. Then, in the middle of our walk, something truly terrifying happened. A figure appeared ahead of us, defying any attempt at rational explanation. At first, we couldn't clearly distinguish what it was, but its silhouette was unmistakable, tall, thin, and with such a commanding presence that it made the air around us feel thick, almost oppressive. That figure seemed to know exactly where we were, as if it had silently followed us throughout our ascent. Its gaze, if it could even be called that, seemed to pierce through us, and a sense of impending disaster hung in the air. When we tried to scream or run, our voices simply failed, as if the sound were swallowed by the mountain itself. We tried to move, but our bodies were heavy, trapped in a place where time and space seemed not to function properly. The fear was so intense that we could barely breathe, and it felt as though something terrible was about to happen. Yet, the figure, as mysteriously as it had appeared, simply vanished. It made no sound, left no trace, as if it had never been there. When we finally reached the base of the mountain, a sense of relief washed over us, but the strangeness didn't disappear. The fear was still palpable, like a shadow that refused to dissipate. Something inside me knew that this hadn't been just a collective nightmare. It was real, and something much larger than any of us could understand was happening. In the days that followed, a growing unease took hold of me, and I was compelled to research similar phenomena. I discovered reports from others who had experienced similar events on isolated mountains, where apparitions and mysterious figures appeared during moments of great tension. The most terrifying part was that in many of these accounts, people couldn't remember how they had reached the point where the apparitions occurred, as if time had distorted or even disappeared. This detail sent an indescribable chill down my spine, as if, on some level, all of it was part of something much bigger and deeper. Today, whenever I look at a distant mountain, something inside me tightens. The image of the figure, that imposing and silent being, never leaves my mind. I know, somehow, that it is still there, waiting, watching, waiting for the right moment to return. The presence we felt on the mountain, that constant sensation of being watched, didn't fade with the end of the expedition. On the contrary, it perpetuated itself, becoming a shadow in my mind that never completely disappears. Every time I see a mountain on the horizon, the fear resurfaces, bringing with it the certainty that that encounter was no accident. Something is still lurking, and one day, perhaps, it will return to finish what it started. I was never someone inclined to believe in supernatural phenomena. I always thought that everything had a logical explanation, a practical reason behind it. However, what happened that night, while I was taking a walk at the foot of the mountain, made my view of the unknown change completely. The day was peaceful, the weather mild, and the landscape around me was simply breathtaking. The mountain with its green slopes was covered in a light mist that made the environment seem even more mystical. The path, though narrow and a little deserted, seemed safe enough for me to walk alone. The place exuded peace, and I felt completely in harmony with nature. But something unexpected and inexplicable would soon turn that walk into a nightmare. As I walked along the trail, enjoying the serenity around me, I started to hear the sound of footsteps behind me. At first, I didn't pay much attention, thinking it was just the echo of my own movements, but soon I realized something was wrong. The sound was clear, and it seemed to perfectly match the rhythm of my steps, as if someone were behind me, trying to catch up. I looked around, but the scene was empty. There was no one. Just the shadows of the trees surrounding the trail and the sound of the breeze. Fear began to set in, but I tried to convince myself that it was just my imagination playing tricks on me. However, the noise continued, now faster, as if something or someone was really running toward me. Panic took over me, and instinctively I started walking faster, hoping the distance between me and whatever was chasing me would increase. But to my surprise, the sound of the footsteps seemed to get closer and closer. My heart began to race, and a sense of desperation began to envelop me. Trying to stay calm, I looked ahead and saw a bend in the trail, which might give me some time to think. Without hesitation, I decided to stop and hide behind a tree, hoping that whatever it was would pass. I stayed there motionless with my heart in my throat, listening to the sound of footsteps getting closer and closer, until suddenly the sound stopped abruptly, so suddenly that for a moment I thought I had lost track of time. Silence took over everything, but the feeling of being watched never left me. I took a deep breath, thinking I was finally safe. But soon, something even stranger happened. In the middle of the trail, right in front of me, a figure appeared, a dark silhouette that seemed out of place, as if it didn't belong to this world. It didn't move, but it had an immense presence, as if it were observing everything around me. I was paralyzed, unable to comprehend what was happening. I tried to look closer, attempting to better understand the shape unfolding before me, but the more I tried to focus on it, the more it seemed to blur, as if it were a mirage or something outside of reality. It was a strange feeling, as if I were facing something that existed and didn't exist at the same time. Fear overtook me, and without thinking, I started walking quickly away. But as I distanced myself, the feeling of being watched only grew stronger. Something was there, and I couldn't escape its invisible presence. I decided to move forward, trying to shake off the strange occurrence and continue on my way. Perhaps, I thought, the best thing to do was leave that moment behind and focus on what lay ahead. However, with every step I took, it felt like the figure was getting closer, invisible to my eyes, but its presence was tangible. It was as if it were walking beside me unseen, but the sensation of being watched, of being followed, never disappeared. What had seemed like a simple, peaceful path was now turning into a twisted journey, a labyrinth of fears and doubts, where every shadow, every movement at the corner of my eye seemed to hide something threatening. My mind was in turmoil, and I didn't know whether to keep going or turn back. It was then, when I looked to my right, that something even more terrifying made me stop. In that part of the trail, there were fresh footprints in the dirt, clearly marked, as if someone had passed by only a few minutes before. They were clear, recent, and I could see them well within my line of sight. The impression I had was that the person who left them couldn't be far away, But the most disturbing thing was that, when I looked around, there was no one, no sign of life in sight. The footprints were there, like a clue of something or someone that had already passed, but the emptiness around only deepened the mystery. The fear now had turned into sheer terror, because if I was alone, who or what had left those marks? Desperate, and not knowing what to do, I made the decision to return to the city, no matter the cost. I didn't want to look back because I knew, somehow, the presence that had been chasing me was still there, watching my every move. The sound of my own footsteps was the only noise I could hear as I ran along the trail, but with each step, the feeling that I was no longer alone intensified. Something was getting closer, faster, stronger. I felt like I was being followed, but when I looked around, I couldn't see anything. Fear paralyzed me, but I kept going, not daring to slow down until I finally reached the main road. There, with my heart racing, I looked up at the top of the mountain, where a strange light blinked, emitting a glow that seemed to call me. It was as if someone was waiting for me, but the sense of danger only grew stronger. That distant glow made no sense, yet I couldn't shake the feeling that, somehow, that presence was still there, watching and waiting. With adrenaline still coursing through my veins, I continued walking, unsure whether it was real or if my mind was playing tricks on me, feeding my paranoia. Deep down, I knew I would never have a logical explanation for what had happened that night, but one thing was certain. The feeling of being watched never left me. Fear consumed me entirely, but the only thing I wanted at that moment was to be anywhere but here, far away from it all. When I finally reached the city, I still felt as if I were being followed, with the eyes of the mountain and that invisible presence fixed on me. Every shadow that appeared in front of me seemed to hide something, and the sound of the wind seemed to carry whispers from a distant place, as if I had crossed a line I wasn't supposed to. I never went back to that place. Every time I pass near the mountain, I feel a cold sensation running down my spine, as if something is watching me from the heights. The silence of that night continues to echo in my mind, an unsettling memory that haunts me. Whatever had been following me, or whatever had been watching me, still lingers in my subconscious, hovering over my thoughts and sleepless nights. To this day, I haven't found any explanation for what I experienced on that walk, and honestly, maybe it's better that way. Some mysteries, no matter how terrifying they are, may be better left unanswered, for the idea of truly understanding what happened could be even more disturbing.